Good afternoon. I say it's straight up 1 o'clock, and I want to make sure that we honor your time. I am Lesa Rohrer, and I serve here at the agency as the Executive Director of Data Literacy. And we're going to be talking about analyzing and interpreting school year 2021 school and district scores. And this is considerations for school leaders. So thank you so much for joining today. If you have questions, we ask that you put them into the chat box. I have a wonderful group of folks that will be helping to answer those questions, so we will get you answers. So why are we here? Well, our outcomes today are to understand the purpose of state assessments in a typical year and during a pandemic, to identify interpretation considerations that should precede analysis of state assessment scores from the spring 2021 administration, to examine state assessment scores using data tools and resources in the accountability reporting application, to utilize other OSDE resources to assist with explaining outcomes to stakeholders, and to connect OSDE tools and resources to support next steps. Here's kind of a timeline. Today's the 23rd. So what happens today is that school and district level assessment data is available in both the accountability reporting application and the OSTP data portal. The information in the portal will be available after 5 o'clock. The reason for that is we're really going to be focusing in on using the data in the accountability reporting application first to help you contextualize the performance data that you see in the portal. That's why we're having the toolkit and the webinar today. The toolkit is posted on the assessment guidance page. It has wonderful white space for you to work through and help answer the questions that we'll be talking through today. Next week on the 28th, we'll host another webinar. This one's directed more towards the performance data that's actually in the OSTP portal, and we'll be looking at how you can use that along with your local data to support analysis and plan next steps. On the 30th, participation rates, enrollment trends, and performance data are published on the Oklahoma Data Matrix, which is found at oklaschools.com. Notice that those three are in combination together: participation rates, the enrollment trends, and the performance data. And we're going to talk about why we're publishing it that way as we move forward. Finally, on October 5th, we're going to be putting together Partnering with Families Toolkit. We'll be inviting some educators in to talk about how they can use the supports in the Oklahoma Parent Portal and also in the paper reports that you'll be receiving later this fall, so that you can work with families to interpret test scores there as well. Let's think about the levels of assessment data. We're going to be talking mostly today about the data in the accountability reporting application. So why are we starting there? Again, because it's going to give us that frame that's a combination of performance, progress, and participation rates. This is by student group and grade level. And in addition to that, there's also student level data that includes OSTP and OAP assessment scores, attendance, enrollment, and coursework, so that you have this whole longitudinal data within your grasp through the accountability reporting application. In tangent, the OSTP data portal houses aggregate reports, and this is for your test scores. This includes the Oklahoma Performance Index scale score, the performance level, and the subject area. This is by student group, and then of course it was through rosters, and you've had the rosters available since June. So this is kind of the difference between these two portals. Note that both of them do require access, granted at your district level. State Department does not give you access to these data portals, and we'll talk more about how to get access to accountability reporting as we move through the presentation. So let's get started with the purpose, because we always start with the why. So what is the purpose of state summative assessments? When we look at it, end of the year summative assessments help us determine levels of proficiency compared to grade level expectations for all students. This is set in statute: below basic, basic, proficient, and advanced. You notice that basic students have the foundational knowledge and skills, but they may not be ready. Proficient students demonstrate mastery of grade level subject matter and are ready for the next grade, course, or level. Advanced students have superior performance. These are aligned on a continuum because we have from grade kindergarten through grade 12. And so where students might be scoring basic 1 year, as they move forward through learning our standards, our goal is to get them to be proficient so that they graduate college and career ready. And the questions raised is OSTP data portal. Does this include SAT with OPI? That information is actually found in the accountability reporting application. That includes the CCRA data that is aligned to those scale scores. And you'll see it for ELA, math, and science. It does not exist in the OSTP data portal at this time, but you will see your science scores. So what's the role of a summative assessment? What we know in any single year, a single test score doesn't provide a complete measure of student achievement. Summative assessments then serve to provide stakeholders with snapshots of student readiness in mathematics, English language arts, and science. They also help to illustrate how well students did when compared to end of grade level expectations. And most importantly, when connected to local data, they help school leaders identify areas of need, inequities to access, and improvements to celebrate. They also work within a system. So state, district, and classroom assessments can work together in a coherent system because the goal is to assess level of readiness in those standards. So everything is aligned to measuring those standards. This occurs day to day in your classrooms, minute by minute, through formative assessments that we call just-in-time teaching that allow us to have checkpoints during our instruction and then change those based on student responses. Interim, as a district coordinator, we had interim assessments. The purpose of those was to see how different student groups were performing so that we could think about what changes we might need to make in our curriculum and what extra supports those students might need. And then summative assessments serve as the end of the year. They should corroborate what our other assessments have already told us. And that's what they serve as. They serve as that end of the year indication of how well our students are doing. So these work within a system that give us timely information on student progress throughout the year. In a typical year, summative assessments help us understand, notice system level decisions, like how district or school curriculum might be working and where additional professional help may be helpful. It's no surprise to you, we didn't have a typical year. Students and educators faced serious disruptions in both 2019-20 and 2021. We went from in-class to online, back to in-class. So we have to really think about the context of those learning experiences that our students have. So when we're thinking about state summative assessments with disruptions due to COVID, there are some caveats that we need to consider. Therefore, those summative assessments still serve as an important marker that help us understand where a student is relative to end of grade level expectations, and those are outlined in our Oklahoma academic standards. However, to interpret 2021, it's imperative that a district and a school understand, first of all, who tested, who didn't test. Then thinking about that, how did those students that tested perform? Thinking about that, how those students that performed, how the learning conditions and interruptions might have affected their performance. So we're going to be looking at this broader picture as we go through this presentation. So considerations, we urge caution, that yellow light, when examining summary reports because of the possibility of uneven participation rates and because of changes to learning conditions that may have been disrupted by the pandemic. Again, we went from a face-to-face learning environment to a complete online learning environment, back to maybe a face-to-face, maybe a continued online. So when we're thinking about that, those changes need to be considered, and that's your local context, and you know that better than anyone. Considerations. So let's break each of these down. One of the things I really need to understand is who was enrolled this past year that might be different from previous years. So how did my student population change? Number of students in each grade level, the demographics of those students. These are all things that I want to dig into. And we have some tools to help you do that we'll talk about later. Again, we're gonna focus on this one a lot. Participation. Based on those students who were enrolled, who tested in my district, in my school, and more importantly, who did not test. Because if I understand who did not test, then I can think about the additional information I might need for that student. To help you with this, we've provided some tools in the accountability reporting application so that you will have this answer. And you'll be able to compare who tested with who should have tested. You'll be able to look at it by grade level and by student group. And notice we've covered performance here because we really need to understand participation before we begin to interpret performance, because those two impact one another. Statutory and policy context. When we look at the annual measure of assessment, there's a 95% threshold. Why is that? Because statistically, 95% gives us assurance that the measure and the performance that we see is representative of the student group that we tested. So 95% is the mark that we want to make. In typical years, schools adhere to this. Exceeding 95% ensures the sampling of the school's population is truly representative. Again, we didn't have a typical year. And we greatly appreciate the measures that you took to get as many students to test as possible so that you had as much data in your sample as you could. We also want to remind you that we had a waiver. And that waiver gave us the ability to waive A through F report cards. So this is truly a year when we're being able to look at data with that flashlight and think about who tested, who did not test, what conditions of learning might those students have had, and how does that impact our scores? And this is what you helped us with. We all believe in the importance of the information that state tests provide, because with that local data and that local context, it really does help us to identify areas of need that we need to move forward, inequities to access, and improvements that we can celebrate. And we can all use some celebrations right now, while also messaging that federally required assessment reporting was waived. And that's something that you're going to want to make sure that you talk with about your stakeholders. Yes, these test scores were important, but in terms of A through F, these test scores are in a different space. So let's think about those considerations. What are things that we really need to dig down and think about? In a normal year, this is kind of how we've always operated. Different schools, same enrollment, they have about the same proficiency. We can really compare that across. We can call them up and say, hey, what did you do? That your proficiency rates might have been higher than mine. And we can then model that because the conditions of learning were similar at all of these schools. We didn't have a typical year. Therefore, we probably might have some uneven participation rates. And there were probably changes in learning conditions due to disruptions by the pandemic. So lower participation rates truly require context. When we have 95% or greater, again, this is statistically significant. It's why it's in the statute. It's borne out during research. 95% or greater presumes student representatives and no data missingness concerns. So it means that we're very confident that the percent of tested is representative of the sample size that we had enrolled. When we drop below 95%, we begin to have some concerns. And this is where we then think about what interpretations are possible and what interpretations are not. Below 80%, we're very concerned because it's highly unlikely that that assessment scores can be comparable. Notice here it says to any prior reporting, and that's even to another grade level, could be to another student group. So I want you to take a few minutes. This is a profile of two of the same school in school year 2019 and school year 2021. We've given you the enrollment, the demographic information of that student population, the participation rates in both years, and those scores. And when you see something that pops out at you, then please put that into the chat. The PowerPoint will be posted on the assessment guidance page at the end of today. Since we've done the 3 recordings, we're going to choose the best one. So someone's noticed that the student population has really decreased. We went from 146 students to 88 students. That could impact our data. And in the morning session, someone really pointed out that students with disabilities, the percentage of that demographic population increased by 3%. And in terms of participation, what's something that really stands out at you from 2019 when we're comparing to 2021? You're right, that grade 8, 85%, that's going to be in that threshold that we'd be a little concerned about in terms of comparing. Grade 7 is at 100%. So we can be pretty confident in those grade 7 scores. Grade 6, 93%, that's right at that marker. So that's why we're going to ask you to do something very similar to this when you're looking at your data, so that you can really step side by side and see what was 2019, how did 2021. And then of course, you know that local context. How many of your students were face-to-face? Did you have hybrid? And you can break that information out. We put this into a chart so that you could then think about these questions. And these are your key questions. Before we can understand performance, we need to understand enrollment. And we need to understand enrollment in two ways. We need to understand who we had this year. So did our enrollment demographics mirror the students that tested? And this is both by grade and by student group. The other question, are our enrollment demographics for 2021 comparable to prior years? So are we serving the same types of students? Again, by grade level and by student group. Then participation, that threshold. Did we have 95% or greater participation on tests? Again, that's by grade level and it's by student groups. And going back in time, are our 2021 school year participation rates comparable to prior years? And as we saw in the example before, they went from 100% to ranging from 100% to 83%. Once we understand those two pieces of information, then we bring in opportunities to learn. The questions here really are thinking about, did all students, not just some, have the same type of access to grade level learning during the 2021 school year? I can tell you that my grandsons participated in online learning all year long this last year, and their counterparts were in a face-to-face. So those were different modalities of learning. Did they experience change within the 2021 school year? That could be that they moved into an online environment, moved back out of an online environment, may have had a long-term sub. So those are the things that we're thinking about when we think about experiences changing. And this gives you a little bit more understanding, hopefully with some pictures to guide that thinking as well. What other information about local conditions? And this is what you really know. You know your local environment better than anyone. So how did those opportunities to learn change? Did the mode of learning change? Did all of your students have access to grade level content? What about attendance? Did you have some students that were missing more often? Did you have teachers that were missing a lot? Because those things matter. And of course, course grades, because that's part of our assessment system at the local level. So this picture altogether helps us to interpret our test scores. A common question that we get, can I compare schools either within a district or across the state? I want you to just put your thoughts in the chat box. Can I compare schools either within a district or across the state? I see a no with an exclamation point. So it's a strong no. I see a maybe. And I didn't see a yes. So let's dig a little deeper. And when I see a caveat, not with the accuracy that we've been able to do in previous years, it's like you knew what this next slide was going to be. Reminder, in a normal year, we've always done this. We've said, hey, we have the same enrollment, we have the same type of participation. Therefore, when we're looking at our performance, we can compare that. It wasn't a normal year. So here's two scenarios, elementary school A and elementary school B. You'll notice that they both had the participation threshold met, so we can check that one off. But if we dig a little deeper, their conditions of learning were different. So that also matters. In school A, they had traditional learning for school year 2021 with only occasional learning disruptions due to the pandemic. Now then, students at quarantine may or may not have had access to reliable internet, and they may have had difficulties receiving tutoring or other supports. Whereas school B, families decided students' learning pathways at the beginning of the fall semester. Most students learned virtually until May 2021. Students' educational dosage was inconsistent within the school, and students likely had disruptions to services. So both of these conditions were not comparable. So this is what we think. Comparisons to schools and districts cannot be done as they have in the past. You already arrived at that answer. In typical years, high participation rates allowed us to assume that all students had comparable instructional experiences and access to grade level content. The non-uniformity of school year 2021 means that these assumptions cannot be met at the school, the district, or the state level. We're going to go back to those three questions. Does the school's enrollment look different than it had in the previous years? Who are we serving? Did 95% of students at the school and for each subgroup participate in the assessments? Were instructional conditions similar for all students within and across schools? And as you're working as the school leaders, as you're working with this is how we're going to be engaging with these scores this year. We'd be remiss if we didn't give you the data that you need to make these. So that's what we're going to dig into next. Here's where to start. As I've said, the administrator toolkit on the assessment guidance page gives you these questions. It gives you how to dig into this data, and it gives you white space to work with your team to understand this. This is all in the accountability reporting application. Start with participation. Who tested, who did not test. From that, then we contextualize performance. In here, you're going to see the scale score, and that's that score between 200 to 399. You're going to have a performance level. You're also going to have the type of test. You're also going to be able to review and look at your enrollment and think about those student groups. Once you've done that, then you can get more granular in the OSTP data portal. The data portal allows you to look at aggregate groups of students and to also see reporting categories. And that's what our webinar next week will focus more on. So in the accountability reporting, the reason that we ask you to start here is because it provides that significantly important context for your interpretation. Contextual assessment data displayed in the application gives you information to answer these questions. Who was enrolled in 2021 that might be different from past years? Who were we able to test? Who were we not able to test? How did our students that tested perform? And based on those students who tested in 2019 and 2021, how did their performance change? This is going to apply to our students in grades 3 through 6, who were in grade 3 in 2019, and they were in grade 5 in 2021. So we're looking at that change across time. So how do we get here? This is in your single sign-on account. You go to the accountability reporting application. If you do not have access to this application, that is granted at the district level. We've included the link for the district superintendent SSO manual, which shows them how to add users. This is housed on the single sign-on under links and docs. And Alyssa just put it into the chat box. So if you need this, then it's there as well. So now we're all signed in. Where do we go from here? Well, we suggest that you navigate to your contextual assessment data. The contextual assessment data is in reports. Notice it's not in the school report card because remember that's been waived. So this is in the contextual data page, and that includes information about all the students that you had enrolled. At this time, the only thing populating for 2021 is assessment performance and student progress. The reason for that is we wanted you to make sure that you had this data before you began thinking about performance so that you can develop that contextual understanding. So assessment performance helps us answer who was enrolled, who tested, who did not test, and how did students that tested perform. Student progress tab helps us answer based on students that tested in both 2019 and 2021, how did their performance change? Let's dig a little deeper. When we break down the assessment performance data, and notice you have performance and participation right there together. We probably always should have looked at it this way, but this has given us that opportunity to really think, are all of our student groups represented in this testing population? Because that matters. So the performance numerator That is the number of students that are demonstrating readiness for the next grade or course is demonstrated by scoring at or above the proficient cut of 300. The performance denominator is going to be the number of students that tested. The performance rate then is the percentage of students scoring at or above the proficient level. And we arrived at that by taking the numerator, dividing it by the denominator, and multiplying it times 100. We're also looking at participation. Notice that your performance denominator is the same as your participation numerator, because those are students that tested. And that's what that number represents. This is to have a valid score for OSTP, CCRA in English language arts, math, or science, or OAP. The denominator is the number of students that were enrolled at the time of testing and therefore expected to test. The participation rate here is the percentage of students that participated in testing and have a valid score. So this would not include did not assess. We'd take the numerator, divide by the denominator, and that's where that participation rate comes from. So again, you're seeing these numbers in context, and it gets even better because I can click on show student groups, and then I can break that out, and I can see who tested and who did not test. And what do you notice about this particular graphic? What's something that stands out to you that if you were working with your stakeholders that you would want them to notice? It's like we really wanted to highlight participation rates that are below 95% are flagged in red. This alerts you that you really may want to consider that data. So anything below 95% is red, and those that are light gray, that means that there were not 10 students represented in that population. So that's why those are grayed out. And if you're a high school, you're probably not going to have that student progress tab because we wouldn't have any students in those grade levels. So remember, the student progress tab is only going to house students that were in grades 3 through 8 for that OSTP. So digging back in, when we think about who tested and who did not test, we have two groups. We have our student groups, which are our demographic groups, and we have our grade levels. So we want to think about both of those. And here, that's why we've highlighted that the grade levels are also in that table. They're at the very bottom of that table. So make sure that you find that information as well. And here we see that grade 5 had 100% testing, while grade 3 was at 94.03. And then we talked about the characteristics of those test takers as being an important element as well. So the other thing that we can do is we can click on that denominator, and when we do that, it goes into a spreadsheet that includes all of the students. The wonderful thing about this table, anywhere that is blue, I can filter. So I can look at all of my third grade students who were female, who were homeless, and who were on an IEP. To gain the understanding of how many students that is, this number of records changes up here at the top. So I can filter through and get an understanding of my enrollment demographics, or if I prefer to, I can download that spreadsheet and then I can work with it there. So these will be those tools that you can use to answer that first question. How did our enrollment look and how did our enrollment change? And there is a note that you may need to use the horizontal scroll bar at the bottom of the spreadsheet to access the download feature because there is so much data on this table. Again, the characteristics of the non-test takers, because it's just as important for us to understand who didn't test. So I can get to this information fairly easily by going to the no score code. Again, the no score code, I might need to scroll over because it's at the very last column. I can filter for DNA, that is did not assess, and I'll be able to get the names of all of my students that I don't have test scores for. And then I'll be able to think about those students and what other information that I have. I can download that spreadsheet. I can add notes, things like grades, attendance, teacher observations, so that I can help support that student as well. Comparing enrollment. The other wonderful thing about this is we can turn back time. I can go to 2021. I can change that year to 2019. Right off the bat here, I can see that in 2021, I had 181 students enrolled at the time of testing. In 2019, I had 223. So I can already understand that I'm serving less students this year than I did in the prior year. Then again, I can click on that denominator. It will give me all the demographic information so that I can understand where that population changed, because just understanding that it changed is the first step. And this is what that looks like, comparing participation by student group. Notice again, that denominator is always going to be the number of students that were enrolled at the time of testing and expected to test. So that is my number of students enrolled. Look at how those things have changed between 2019 and 2021. And think about what impact that has. One thing that really stands out to me, in 2019, 100% of their students participated. So we're very confident that the performance represented in this particular graphic is representative of that student group. When we look at 2021, there are some areas that we would be less confident with. And that's what we were asking you to look at here. That's why we've provided this visualization so that you have the tools you need to do that. Change happens, doesn't it? Change is measured by comparing a student's performance from 2019 with 2021. What we're looking for here is how they're progressing towards mastery of key knowledge, skills, and abilities. Because remember, our tests test our standards. Our standards get progressively more difficult every year. So if I score at the same level, I might still have shown some progress because the standards get harder. So here we've taken to capture some of that nuance. We've looked at those performance levels that we talked about at the beginning, the below basic, the proficient, and the advanced. We've divided those levels into half so that we can really think about how students are moving or progressing between those levels. So I can stay within the same level. I can move from basic low to basic high. I can move from basic high to proficient low. I could even move from basic high to advanced high. So this is what we're talking about when we're looking at this measuring progress. And here we're comparing how students performed in 2019 with how they performed in 2021. This requires that they took the test in both of those years. So you're also going to want to pay attention to your numbers here. How many students are in this population and what kinds of students are in this population. Lucky for you, we've given you that opportunity and that ability. Again, click on the denominator. When we click on the denominator, it opens a spreadsheet. It identifies all of the students that met this criteria. The criteria being that they had a score in 2019 and they were in either grades 3 through 8, and they had a score in 2021 and they were in either grades 4 through 8. So our third graders that tested in third grade in 2019 became that fifth grader that's testing in 2021. I can look at this by demographics. I can look at this by grade level. That scale score, 300 is always proficient, so I can see where that student is in relation to that. I can think about where they were in 2019, and I can think about where they've moved in 2021. So the growth performance, this is the prior year, this is the current year. We'll break that down here. Demographics, this is all of our SS subgroups. So I can look to see if we're meeting the needs of those diverse learners. Is there a group of learners that is not performing as well? And if so, what can I do in my local system to help serve that student? The type, OSTP, this is OSTP for science. Nope, in this term, it's not for science, I misspoke. OSTP, CCRA, and OAP. Why is it not for science? Well, it's not for science because we only test science in grades 5, 8, and 11. Therefore, it doesn't meet the criteria. A student can't test in science in 2019 as a third grader, and then again in 2021 as a fifth grader because we don't have a science test in third grade. So this is really just looking at English language arts and mathematics because we test those across grades 3 through 8. 11 is not included because that doesn't meet the criteria. So this is going to be for your elementary and your middle schools. Then that scale score. That scale score is a raw score conversion. And we can't use the raw score because not every question on the test has the same level of difficulty. So it's not about the number of questions that we got right, it's about which questions we got right. And this is why we have that scale score conversion. The good thing about this is it's a common scale. Everything is scaled from 200 to 399, and 300 is always proficient. So that allows for consistency across score interpretations, across those grade levels, and across those subject areas. Performance level of the prior year, that's taking that student's scale score and it's seeing where it aligns in that performance level, because there's a relationship between those two. Again, the closer I am to 300, the closer I am to proficient. Growth performance level for the current year, we did the same thing. We looked at where that scale score was in relationship to where that performance level is. And that's what you're seeing reflected in this table. Here are some things that you can think about with the student progress. Again, the column up at the top, the number of records, lets you know how many students are in each of these, are meeting each of these criteria. You could look at the number of students that stayed the same, moving from grade 3 to 5. I could look at the number of students that move to a lower level. I can look at the number of students that move to a higher level. I can take that and connect it with my local data and help corroborate what I already know about what might be working in our system, because remember, this is about curricular decisions. Student progress can also be downloaded in a spreadsheet so that you can filter, you can put in pivot tables, you can manage this data however you choose to. I want to remind you that the purpose of displaying this data is to really help you, the user on the outside, to understand how scores changed. Because it's accountability reporting, it can provide that longitudinal history that you may not have in your local student information system. So it allows us to look at students that tested that you had in your roster in 2021 and compare their student score in 2019, even though they might have been in a different school. This helps you understand how student experiences may have impacted progress. It also gives you a whole lot of other information because you can click on that student, you can look at their enrollment history, you can think about their attendance, their absences, you can get a lot of information. So like any data, this is a starting point that helps you ask more and better questions. Reminder again that we were approved for a waiver. There are no A through F letter grades. So even though this lives in what looks like academic growth, we're really just giving you the information to look at how performance changed. There is no A through F letter grade this year. Let's recap. 2 places to look when we're in accountability reporting. This is our contextual assessment data. Our contextual data includes all of the students that we had enrolled at the end of the school year, so it gives us a more holistic picture. The assessment performance tab is going to help us answer who was enrolled. It helps us answer how enrollment changed. It helps us know who tested. It helps us understand who did not test. It helps us then to connect that to how students performed. Student progress tab, if we're in an elementary or middle school, is going to look at, based on students that tested in 2019 and 2021, how did their performance change? You would be disappointed if we didn't leave you with supporting tools and resources. So we are really trying to provide what you need. If we haven't, please let us know so that we can build it. I hope you've really taken away that it's critical to understand who tested, who did not test. When we understand that, then we think about how did students' learning experiences differ. When we answer that, then we can think about how did students perform. This is a triangulation of this data. And we need to understand that before we can look forward. And when we look forward, we need to think about intentional, targeted, and evidence-based next steps that will help our students thrive and grow in this time. I want to invite you to our next webinar. It's next week. If you're not tired of listening to me, join me next Tuesday. We'll be talking more about the OSTP data portal. We'll be connecting it with your local data so that you can think about planning next steps. We have 2 times. Hopefully one of those works for you. Again, it will be recorded and it will be on the website. On the assessment guidance page, we're working to put tools and resources. Currently, we have the overview guide and the toolkit. Next week, we'll have the teacher's toolkit, and then the following week, we'll have the family toolkit, so that we hope that you have the tools you need to help your stakeholders understand the context of your local assessment data. Another thing that we've built here at the agency is the Ready Together website. The Ready Together is supporting students through the pandemic and beyond. It has guidance documents, resources, and webinars. One of the ones that we're highlighting is how can accelerated learning models support students with unfinished learning. So we could use our OSTP data, think about what unfinished learning might need. Then here's a guidance document that could help us then make those next plans. So this all works together. And if you haven't yet, we encourage you to register for our TeleEdge. TeleEdge is a partnership with Oklahoma State Department of Education. It's built on a telemedicine platform that we used in Alaska, and it allows us to come together in real time to talk about problems of practice and to come up with common solutions. We've addressed topics such as supporting student and educator mental health, assessing the unfinished learning, targeted tutoring, and supporting special populations. The wonderful thing about these is that they're all recorded and the resources are housed in a toolkit so that you can go back and access those. So I'd encourage you to register now and attend those that really meet your needs. And if there's something that you'd like to see addressed, you can email us and we can get a session built for that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over for some questions. I see lots of links to resources in the toolkit. I'll also send up a follow-up email after this webinar. We hope to have the recording on the website. Well, I will have the recording on the website before I leave today. And as you have questions, just put them in the chat box, or you can always email us. I'm Lesa Rohrer. Alyssa Griggs has been helping answer questions. She serves as the Executive Director of Accountability. We also have Cora James here, and she serves as the Executive Director of Assessment. We are here to help and support. And then you also have the whole assessment team. Reach out to any of us with any question. The only bad question is the one that doesn't get asked. And yes, we will be posting the PowerPoint. We'll post the slide deck and the recording at the same time. And in terms of the ACT score that you're going to see in the portal, that's reflective of the one that's for the 11th grade. That would be the one that's transcripted. So it's the one that has the scale score. And again, if there's anything that we can do, just let us know. We're going to hang out here a little bit longer for questions. But I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And I hope you're not terribly disappointed that we didn't take the whole hour and a half. So enjoy that little bit of free time that maybe hopefully you're getting, and we'll talk to you again soon.